Hey, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Sophie and I'm the founder of Agnes LDN, and today I have got a pattern cutting and sewing video for you. I'm going to be showing you how I made this pinafore dress. It's a fairly straightforward pattern cutting video and sewing video, so if you are a beginner just getting into dressmaking, this might be a great one for you. It's a nice basic shape as well, so as you can see I'm wearing it over a t-shirt now. I'm also probably going to wear it over like polo necks and jumpers and things like that for winter, and then in summer I'll probably wear it over t-shirt, so it's a nice like in between seasons dress. Anyway, where was I? So I had grand plan, well not that grand, but I kind of had an idea about what I wanted this dress to look like in my head, and it didn't actually turn out like the sketch, so I will show you the changes and alterations I had to make along the way as well. Let's just get straight into the video and I will show you how I made it.
So my original plan for this dress was to have button-on straps, pockets, an adjustable waist with a couple of different buttonholes and some frilly straps, and then a mid-length skirt with a gathered frill at the hem, and then no back panel, just like a crossover straps. So I started with a basic block pattern and my own measurements, as well as these blocks are only a small size 10, so they're a bit small for me. To create the front panel, I drew in the centre front and then marked the length and width I wanted the top panel to be. This was pretty straightforward as it's basically a rectangle that I'm going to cut on the fold. And then, as usual with pattern cutting, I'm writing as much information on the pattern as possible. For example, when I made it, the name of the garment, etc. And adding a 1 centre seam allowance all the way around. Next up is the waistband. I measured my own waist and added a bit of extra length for the buttons to overlap on one side and for the buttonholes. I know I didn't want it to be too fitted, as I knew that I was going to want to wear tops underneath it and potentially jumpers and things like that. So I just went for a straight strip. I think I originally went for 5 centimeters and then I ended up reducing this once I tried the dress on. So I'll cut 2 pairs of these on the fold. So I have 4 pieces in total, which means I have 2 for each side, and then I can have like an outer and a lining and I can back them out. So I'm just marking on the buttonhole length and the positioning. So I've measured my actual button to decide the length of the buttonhole, and I'm marking some notches as well as to where I would position the top panel in the center of the waistband. Now for the skirt, again I'm using the basic block, taking the side seams slightly wider and out more at the bottom for a slightly more A-line shape. And then I'm going to add a lot of fullness to the centre, which will allow for the fabric to gather at the waistband. I think I added an extra 6 centimeters for this. I possibly could have added more, and if it was a lighter weight fabric and I wanted a much fuller shape, I would have added more. Again, leaving the top of the skirt waistband straight as it will be gathered into the waistband. And this will be cut on the fold, so it'll give me 1 piece for the front skirt. And I'm also going to add a pocket in here as well. So I'm just sketching on the shape of the pocket, and I sketched the shape of the pocket edge and then also the outline of the pocket lining. This means that we're really easy to trace off. In the end, I'll end up with 2 extra pattern pieces that will attach to the front of the skirt to make up the pocket. So an extra 4 pieces in total for the pocket, 2 for each side. So at this point, I actually should have made this pocket a little bit deeper, because when I tried it on, I couldn't actually get much in it. Yeah, so I'm just tracing off the pocket, making sure that it's the same size and shape as the pocket shape on the front panel. So all my pattern pieces will match up when it comes to sewing. Next up is the back panel, which is really straightforward, just like the front panel, except without the pockets. So I'm adding a bit more into the side seam, again taking it down to a more A-line shape, and adding 6 centimeters onto the center back as well to add that distance in. And then I'm just checking the length of the front skirts to make sure that they match up. So to get the length of this skirt, I just measured on myself with a tape measure how long I wanted the skirt to be, and then measured that against the paper pattern. So once I've got all my pattern pieces, I'm ready to cut out my fabric. I also created a pattern piece for the straps and for the bottom frill hem as well. Again, just straightforward rectangles. Normally you'd test your pattern with a toile and a cheaper fabric. However, I'm just going to go for it and make alterations as I need to as I go along. So I folded my fabric in half and I'm laying out the biggest pattern pieces first on the fold and then arranging the smaller pattern pieces around them for the most economical lay plan. To start sewing, I'm going to bag out the top panel, and I'm going to do this by sewing 3 sides together. There's no wrong or right side to this fabric that I'm using, but if there was, I would be sewing with the right sides together. So I'm sewing around all 3 sides and then I'm turning through the right way around. Next up, I'm going to make the pocket, starting with the pocket bag by attaching the lining of the pocket and the outer of the pocket, making sure that you have opposite pairs here. So yeah, you don't want to make 2 right pockets or 2 left pockets, for example. So I'm going to sew the lining and the outer together just round the curved edge, and then I'm going to sew it onto the front of the skirt panel by turning it inside out and sewing the right sides together. And I'm doing this on both sides. So I'm making sure that my raw edge of my seam is not inside the pocket, it's like inside the skirt. So when I fold it through, I've got my pocket and pocket bag, which should lie flat against the front skirt fabric. So then I'm going to attach the skirt side seams of the front and back skirt using French seams. To French seam, you sew the wrong sides of the fabric together with a 0.5 centimeter seam allowance, and then you trim off the excess seam allowance and any loose threads, etc. And then you turn it around and you sew the right sides together. This is a really neat way to finish a seam, and it encloses all the raw edges in the seam. And yeah, it's just a nice, quick and easy way to finish the seam. Alternatively, I could have bound the seam or overlocked it or zigzag stitched. But yeah, I really like French seaming, and it's quite a common way of finishing a seam on lighter weight fabrics. If you had a bulky fabric, you probably wouldn't use a French seam. So once I've attached the side seams, I'm going to do a gathering stitch along the skirt waistband. I'm going to change my stitch length on my sewing machine to as long as it would go, and then just simply stitch all the way around the top, making sure that I don't back tack. Now I'm just attaching the sides of the bottom frill hem, again with a French seam, and then the bottom of the frill I'm going to roll hem simply by turning over 0.5 centimeter and then turning over again and top stitching along. And then the other end of this frill I'm going to do a gathering stitch so I can gather it into the bottom of the skirt. So I'm going to pin it onto the bottom of the skirt, trying to evenly space out the gathers so they look consistent and even. And then I'm going to sew it on again with a French seam. A little bit harder because obviously the gathers make it quite bulky, but again, it is quite a neat way of finishing it. So it just means that you don't see all that kind of messy gathering thread. Once I've attached the bottom hem, I'm going to attach one side of the waistband. So I've stitched up the side seam of the waistband, and then I'm going to sew on one side onto the waist of the skirt, and then I will sew the other side of the waistband on so the skirt is sandwiched in between the two of them, meaning that the raw edge of the skirt waist is sandwiched in the waistband so we won't see it. And then I'm going to pin the top panel in place and stitch to one side of the waistband. So I'm also finishing the edge of the little overlap of the waistband as well by stitching down the short edge and then stitching the other end together for as long as I could. So once I've stitched on the top panel, my camera actually died at this point, and I decided to try the dress on and see how it's fitting. So it's actually sagging loads over the top, and I thought the waistband was a bit too big. So I reduced the size of the top panel and decided to add a small dart in to give it a better shape over the bust. And I wanted to top stitch around the edge of the top panel as well to give it a bit more structure. So I did double row of top stitching, and also press the darts out as well. So other alterations I made was I removed the frill on the straps as it just didn't look right, and then I reduced the length and the width of the strap, again pressing the straps, and then I top stitched around the edge of the straps, just a single row this time all the way around the edge, and added buttonholes to the end. So buttonholes are actually really straightforward on my sewing machine. I have like a 4-step function to be able to do them, and a buttonhole foot as well, which is really handy. So I tested the buttonhole on scrap fabric before doing it on my actual straps, as they're super messy to unpick, and I used my actual button to measure the length of the buttonhole that would be needed. Once the buttonhole's been stitched, I used an unpicker and embroidery scissors to cut the slit and tested whether or not the button would go through the buttonhole, and then I know whether I need to make it a little bit bigger or smaller. Ideally, you want your button to go through the buttonhole with a little bit of resistance, but not too much. You don't want it to be popping open, but you don't want to struggle to be able to do it up. Once I was happy with the length of the buttonholes, I did it on both of my straps. I also at this point had reduced the width of the waistband by like a couple of centimeters, I think. So then I reattached the straps and the front panel to the waistband and pressed the waistband several times. So I pressed both sides over with a seam allowance, and then I just top stitched it closed by top stitching all the way around as well. And then added the buttonholes to the edge of the waistband, and so stitched the buttons on by hand. So now I've made the dress and I've made the alterations as well, it's time to go back to my original pattern and make the changes on my original pattern pieces. In case I want to make this dress in future, then I don't need to go through all these alterations again. The pattern just fits and is ready to go. And then I'm going to press the dress one final time and try it on again.
Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave me a comment in the box below. Let me know what you thought. Did you like the dress? What other fabrics should I try and make it in? Let me know if you try it yourself. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to my channel so you never miss another video like this. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back next week with another video. If you'd like to find out more about Agnes London in the meantime, go and follow us on Instagram at Agnes London, or check out my website www.agneslondon.com. See you next week.